Hello and welcome to Dice Punks, a tabletop role-playing podcast where we focus on playing full campaigns in less well-known systems. This week in episode 49, our Nobilis make potentially perilous plans and preparations. Hello and welcome. I'm Adam, your friendly neighborhood game master, and joining me are...
Hello, I'm Drew, and I'll be playing Leorian, Viscount of Tempo and newly minted Divinity of Revelry.
Hi, I'm Robin, and I'll be playing Lissa Crate, who's mad in more ways than one.
I'm Dez, and I will be playing Rumnet, the Pawn of Darkness.
Excellent, thank you. So before we get started, I once again forgot to award experience points at the end of last session, so I'm doing it now here at the beginning of this session. Everybody from last session got one mortal and one divine experience point, which you are free to spend in just a moment. First off, we'll need to get the bonus XP roll for Rumnet.
Yep. Hey! Tray sixes.
Nice. Raise the count.
Yeah, raise that.
I am one shy of 80 total mortal XP for this campaign.
Good lord. This was, of course, a thing you added to your character when mortal was all you were, but those days are long since over.
And also I've spent a truly untoward amount of mortal XP buying spells that I know but haven't used.
Yeah, mostly you have not used them. There have been a couple that have come up, but yeah, as I think I've noted before, maybe only in peaks though. So let it go on the record here that the relationship between the Nobilis at the beginning, Romnet, and the Chancel was only where I pictured it being for most of the campaign for like the first half dozen or so sessions. And then it went in a direction that I had not anticipated, as these things are wont to do. But in the meantime, now that we've got that XP on Romnet's character sheet, shall there be any expenditures of XP?
Oh,
this
yes.
time?
Mm-hmm.
Well, then in that case, Des, kick us off.
I shall be moving from Pawn of Darkness to Jarl of Darkness.
Which for our listeners, I believe is level 3
Yes.
In Darkness. So Jarl of Darkness it is. 3 divine experience points. Any mortal growth on your...
Not yet.
Very well. Anyone else for XP expenditures?
Yes. I think, monkey see, monkey do. I'm going to have to go ahead and be the Jarl of Revelry.
We're all Jarls here, I suppose. Again, secondary domains operating as they do. That's going to be 3 divine XP to get you up to level 3 in Revelry, bringing
Sounds
you
good.
to your maximum as Tempo is still at 3.
And I believe I don't know if we've mentioned on air, but Tempo stays at a maximum of 3 because not for any inbuilt mechanical reason, but by agreement between myself and the Hollyhock God, in order to limit the timey-wimey plot-breaking potential.
Because out of the entirety of the crew, I think I'm the only one that enjoys time travel shenanigans. And even then, having written papers on it, I have opinions about doing it right.
Yeah.
And also introducing time manipulation at a fairly late stage in the campaign was a concern as well.
Yeah, you don't want to just throw that in there haphazardly. What is this, some kind of middling wizard school series written by a world-famous bigot or something? I think by the nature of partying, the Jarl of partying, of course, archetypically, anachronistically, would be Andrew WK. So this also concomitantly increases my empathy. I will spend my mortal XP to raise my empathy to 3.
Bravo. Can we can we please rule that whatever Leorian's middle name is, it starts with a W?
Yes, agreed. Motion carries.
Now that I've been thoroughly derailed into having Andrew WK songs stuck in my head, Robin, any XP expenditure on your part?
Yes. I asked you to percolate on something prior to the session starting.
Yes, thank you for the prompt. I am thinking that the fair way to handle this for our listeners, as Mavia throughout the campaign, Robin has had one aspect, even when everybody else was locked to 0, while Lissa had 0. And so now that we're at the point in the campaign where aspect can be improved, I was trying to think of a good way to make that essentially work. And I think I am going to go with the initial suggestion on that of, if you raise your aspect to 1 as Lissa, Mavia will have access to aspect 2. That does mean, where aspect is concerned, which one's in the driver's seat at any given time does make a fair bit of difference. And it may mean that with the Shard of Madness in the mix, we pick and choose moments where the transition might require some particular effort or role or something, just to kind of introduce some whimsy into the proceedings. But I will not be attempting to just straight up sabotage you in any of it. I'm just going to try to pick moments for drama, essentially.
Okay.
Is that agreeable?
What happens if is my aspect capped at 1, or could I raise it to 2?
Do you have the Divine XP for that?
I have 3, so to purchase 1, it would be 1 point, and then 2.
Incorrect. It would be 3 for each point, because the divine attributes are 3 just point blank.
I forget, that's the mortal stuff
domains,
where you're essentially paying for. Okay,
That's right.
Got it. Excellent. Yeah, so then I would just raise it to 1.
This is why I've been sitting on 2 divine XP for months.
Makes sense. I always get my divine and mortal attributes confused.
That is perfectly fair, because XP expenditure in this cockamamie system I've cooked up is kind of nightmarish, I will admit. Because Rain already has 2 rates. Stats raise for 10 XP regardless of what level they're at, whereas skills raise and a sliding scale, plus you have expert and master dice thrown in there, and then on top of that we have this whole other experience currency that goes at a flat rate. So
I'm also adjusting my maybe a verbiage here.
Perfect. Yeah, but that sort of thing is what I'm here for. One of the things that I'm here for.
I think as far as the curve of how easy or difficult those various kinds of XP are to come by, it works out fine. I just forget the math every single time.
Well, because Divine XP is hard to come by. Yeah.
Right.
At this point, though, with all that XP expenditure out of the way, I think we're ready for our recap of last session, which is courtesy of either Lissa or Mavia, whichever one is deciding to speak up this time.
Hey, Dosk. According to this book, Currents of the Cosmos, there were some deities that apparently expected these things called confessions on the regular from their followers. And, well, I've got some stuff to confess and just get off my chest, but I'm also confident that you'll listen as a friend and not a wrathful god, so here goes. I confess to killing the party. As cheeky as that statement is, I want to own that I'm not proud of what I did. We were witness to a strange feast celebrating the ascension of Tyrios as a godhead, and I did what I could to get him to crack, as it were. Unfortunately, this involved stirring up a kind of miraculous riot in the hearts of some hapless folks. I didn't realize at the time that they were being punished, thereby making me unintentionally complicit in their punishment. I tried to make that error on my part right, which brings me to I confessed to committing murder. It was not a decision that I took lightly, and it didn't change the outcome so much as ensure that power wasn't reclaimed by our enemies. I drove Feywa's bloodstone blade through Tyrus's spine as Mavia. He resisted by gripping my arm with a firm hand, which I bit off to finish the job unopposed. I confess that I've taken the business of stealing hearts too literally lately. I liberated Tyrus's heart, and similarly took a bite of it before passing it off to Ramnut and Leorian, netting them the domains of darkness and revelry, respectively. I'm stuck with madness, which is an all too familiar accusation from those I try to hold accountable with my anger while mortal, namely men and bitter exes calling women like myself crazy. I hope there's a chance for me to get back to figurative heart stealing, maybe someday if we don't destroy everything. Having to physically steal hearts is far more exhausting. I confess that I, perhaps by way of my younger self's inclinations, was amused by Vruta's discomfort upon arriving in the midst of this bloody banquet. He was apparently compelled to bring us a book, Currents of the Cosmos, mentioned earlier, due to whatever miraculous essence was left behind from your connection, or he's now some kind of prophet of Sealing, but he had found some truly useful information about how to kill a god in that book. I confess that I played a small role in the creation of Tyrus's chancel by contributing to its horrible prerequisite of 100 deaths, however false his ascension was. I also confess that I tried to fish some juicy tidbits from Vruta about you, but he said his only embarrassing stories featuring you were also embarrassing for him, so I didn't push the matter. I just met the guy. Oh, and I should probably confess to the fact that I gave him the okay to hit you with Currents of the Cosmos once we arrived in Bor, and before his commencement into our Familia Caelestis as the Nobilis of Flare. I genuinely thought it wouldn't connect or hurt you. It kind of envisioned it just passing through, so you have my profound apology if it pinged anywhere on your divine senses. Lastly, I confess that this fixation of mine with destroying Cillian is not wholly necessary to our goals, even if I fear it's shared by all of us. Do I believe she is the most direct means of obtaining the power to destroy the throne? Yes. But I confess I know there are other means to that end, but those are far removed from my preference. This book also says that typically you would have to do some repetitions of some prayer or another multiple times as decided by the speaker of the particular deity, but can I just settle for taking 3 shots instead?
Brilliant. So we rejoin our Nobilis sitting in the heart of the chancel, a sort of graphite sketch resembling the common room of the Nightcap in Fermata, with Vruta having just suggested that everybody pour themselves a drink and sit down to decide what to do with the information provided by Currents of the Cosmos regarding, well, how to handle Sealand and or try to resolve this whole God's War, last God standing situation. Heady stuff, but at the very least, there are unidentifiable liquors to help in the process. Vruta, for his part, has immediately followed up on his suggestion by perusing the shelves of, as far as you can tell, completely impossible to identify bottles, as they are the sketched-in suggestions of various shapes of things with labels, in the cases where there are labels, that merely have little scrawls to suggest what handwriting might look like from a distance, if illustrated. Dusk, for his part, is still sitting at the bar, looking a little distant, holding a now empty glass.
Are you okay there, buddy?
Assuming you are addressing Dosk, he does not seem to realize that you are addressing him. He just continues to kind of stare off.
I wave my hand in front of where his eyes would be with a little...
He doesn't have eyelids to blink, but his body language gives you the idea that he's blinking rapidly, and he goes, "What? Oh, sorry, what?
Are you okay? You were somewhere else."
Yeah, no, it's dumb. It just takes a lot of concentration lately to be in one spot, and that makes it," he gestures vaguely above his head, "worse."
The pool?
He nods glumly.
Does the feel of it change when someone's eliminated?
He sort of takes a deep breath and he says, "It's not that acute, really. It's, I couldn't pinpoint a moment when it jumped from 4 to 6 or something like that, but when I incorporate into," and he gestures at his sort of sketch of a physical body, "I find that it has suddenly increased since the last time. It's,
So no, but yes.
Sure. Exactly. Well said."
Is there any way to talk to us, using words, that doesn't require that you discomfort yourself by incorporating?
Not to some degree. I could discorporate, but I would still have to focus my presence to, communicate on a human level.
I mean, you could just set up a metaphorical loudspeaker. I'm sure it would be entertainingly received, if nothing else.
Certainly could try. I don't want to be absent for this discussion, but maybe afterward. I think, too, he gestures at Vruta. Vruta has said something about the effect of incorporating more domains, and we've been doing that pretty rapid fire here, and I think it's starting to catch up with me a little bit how being spread a little thin, maybe. No. Well, yes, but not figuratively.
Yeah, something similar happened to me when I was in charge of too many shards, so I can only imagine how that would feel on a larger scale.
As he says, "For what it's worth, having the mediating layer of so many of my estates minded by Nobilis is probably helping.
Good.
It insulates me a bit. I can only imagine what it's doing to Celiand." And he sort of shudders a little bit.
Bad things, one hopes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one does. By this time, Vruta has found a bottle that apparently meets with his satisfaction and poured it into a scribbled together goblet, and has turned to face you three and sort of gestures with his goblet and says, "I'm fairly sure I found wine, so if there's anything in particular that any of you would like, I think this will probably be relatively involved."
Wine sounds superlative.
Hey, Dusk, do you have coffee?
"Oh, I could probably have a reasonable facsimile thereof. Just a moment."
If it's not too much effort, that would be wonderful.
"Nah, it's the heart of my chancel. I'm sure I can do it. Besides, I've got darkness now, and what is coffee if not liquid darkness?" And he sort of holds out a hand and sort of concentrates, and slowly a mug takes shape, sort of sitting bottom resting on his palm, and he takes it and puts it on the bar and then stares at it for a long moment. And when he turns and hands it to you, it is full of what looks like the results of somebody rubbing a graphite pencil far too hard for far too long. But there is a little hint of steam coming up off the top of it. And he says, it doesn't look like much, but hopefully it tastes all right.
I will have a sip of it.
You've had better, but you've had worse. As long as you don't look directly at it, it is pretty convincingly coffee.
This is definitely not the worst coffee I've had, Dusk. Thank you.
That's
I will turn
right.
to Vruta. Have you had coffee before?
He makes a little bit of a face and says, once, and it was enough.
Fair.
Very, very bitter in my experience. He hands a second goblet of wine to Leorian and with the comment, I believe it is a red, if not a superlative one.
Hey, Dosk, remind me which of these is your strongest again? Any whole grain liquors?
Dusk chuckles and leans over the bar, rummaging around beneath it, and pulls up what is clearly in the shape of a clay jug, and just slides it down the bar to you and says, if you want a glass, you can grab one, gesturing to a shelf behind the bar. But feel free to drink from the jug if you prefer.
Thanks. I pop the cork on the jug and take a swig directly from it.
It's self-sanitizing.
Mm-hmm.
Amusingly, you have to guess which part of the aperture might be cork, and it feels to your thumb like cork, but it looks to your eyes like a sort of concentric scribble, circular scribble of like vine charcoal, and when it pops off, it dissolves in the air.
Nice.
Vruta takes a sip of his wine and sighs and gestures to one of the tables and heads toward it himself.
I pull out a chair at the table and sprawl, more or less, and take up space, relax as I do.
Yeah.
I take a seat next to Vruta, figuring we'll be sharing a great deal more wine.
Mm-hmm.
I will sit in whatever space remains.
There are plenty there. The tables of the nightcap are fairly large, most of them. But Dosk stays by the bar for now, but does turn on his stool. He leans back on the bar to sort of face the table where you're seated, and Vruta takes another sip of his wine and then says, well, I'm certainly the neophyte here, and I don't wish to overstep, but it seems to me like there are a few things that likely need to happen for us to succeed in anything resembling the goal you've set forth. That said, perhaps the thing to do would be to get me up to speed, and I can try to apply my knowledge from our text here to the situation as best I can. He lays his hand on Currents of the Cosmos, where it lays off to one side. We don't have to go fully into the dialogue here as you bring Vruta up to speed. I suppose the only question is anyone for any reason withholding any information? Or if we want to give maybe like an overview of like what you present as like the sequence of events or priorities. Otherwise, we can just fiat that he's up to speed on everything you've got to tell him on the other side of all this.
I'm not.
I think we've already given them an estimate of which gods are currently
Mm-hmm.
alive, and I can't think of any reason to hide anything from him at this stage. He's in the family, after all.
Correct. Yeah.
I also hide nothing, and probably I go into detail about what we know about the nature of predation and god-killing tools like bloodstone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure. So a couple refills for most people later. He seems to be up to speed. You filled him in on sort of your working terminology of the throne and, the void at the top of existence, what you know about the previous overgod that you hadn't already told him, some details maybe of your sojourn in the Gods' Woods, and interactions with Sealand, a dramatis personae of those left to your knowledge.
I would also do a toned down, so loud music at a low volume. Miracle of what the pool feels like, and the despair of the former overgod.
Okay, yeah. He sort of shudders at it, but seems to understand what you were trying to get across, and this is probably also useful as sort of a refresher and laying out of things for everybody else as well. And at the end of it, there's a pause, and Ruta says, "Even a few days ago, I wouldn't have thought I'd end up here, but I'm glad to be of assistance at any rate, because it seems that, well, this is sort of an all-hands-on-deck situation." So, it seems that there are two distinct objectives, perhaps. 3, depending on how you articulate them. 2 objectives and a condition. The condition is no one imperator can be the last imperator standing. The book suggests that this fulfills the requirements, that immediately that imperator would be pulled up and become the overgod, will they or no they. But within that condition, we have the antagonism of Sealand to deal with, as well as the presence of that void at the top of creation. For what it's worth, philosophically minded individual that I am inclined to take the risk that maybe everything might end in order to destroy it, but it does feel, presumptuous to make that decision for everyone. I mean, after all, humans did come through the previous cycle of all of this. They exist still, and most, as far as I know, are as yet living relatively free lives. 'Tis perhaps risky and, presumptuous. Not that I think you are wrong.
It's the question, isn't it? I mean, what's more violent? To overturn things, perhaps wipe everything out, or to leave things as they are? I suppose an honest assessment requires us to take full stock, philosophical individuals that we are, of just how violent the status quo really is. And I might argue quite very, very.
The number of people who have been killed simply for existing inconveniently in the scale of this war between gods is not negligible.
I make no pretense of claiming that I'm right to make this decision for everyone, or that it's even the right choice to begin with. We may very well become villains in a book should we fail or should we succeed and things don't cease to exist completely, but I know that this is the only way that we can change this cycle and prevent the pain that it creates from occurring again and again.
It's a system set up without consent and without justice. It's also the status quo.
Indeed, indeed. One of my sisters is a military woman, and she told me once that if you have an adversary who is seeking total victory, that's the most intolerable thing, right? Because if they succeed, then they have achieved total victory. And if they simply are allowed to continue trying to succeed, they will cause untold damage. So philosophical proposition, I say, realizing that I'm drunker than I meant to be already. My philosophical proposition would be that we need to do something about Celiand either way. I mean, if she's the last one standing, that's arguably as bad as nothing standing at all.
That I can get behind.
Ruta nods contemplatively and shoots a surreptitious glance over at Dosk, who appears to have dozed off on his bar stool, though it is uncertain given that he lacks facial features.
Psst.
There is no response.
I give the divine equivalent of a psst.
There's no response. Ruta looks thoughtful. He says, right, no. There does come a point where the status quo is, worse than nothing at all. It does.
You argue, with some justice, that to most people unaware of these machinations, perhaps we're not at that point.
And I suppose the question remains, is a chance at existence, however curtailed, always preferable to the possibility of non-existence? And I am inclined, philosophically at least, to agree that more just order is worth taking a chance for. How, and he particularly addresses Lissa in this, how did the estates come to be assigned following the demise of the previous Overgod?
I don't think I know this information.
So you have no specific explicit answer. Anything you answered would be inference, I believe.
Yeah. I'm going to do a quick greater divination of Fury and ask how Fury became assigned as such following the demise of the Overgod.
All right. Your estate answers you with a sensation that I'm going to describe anachronistically. It was sort of the mechanics of shrapnel. If you picture a center to the entire world, everything that is being spread out around this center point. That center point was the origin of the explosive force, and Fury was one of the pieces of shrapnel that flew outward from that center point, and it lodged where it landed. It's unclear precisely what the nature of the initial entity it landed in all those eons ago was, but you know that by the time you entered the scene, it had been associated with Mott.
Can I follow that up with another greater divination, asking about who was the entity in which Fury had initially landed following its division?
You can, and you do get that information, but it is very hard for you to understand. What you can be sure of is that it was not a person, or a plant, or an animal. Beyond that, you're not really sure. The nature of the recipient of Fury at that moment is not something that you have a ready concept for.
But it was not Mott.
What?
I guess Mott's not necessarily a person or a planet.
Yeah, like Mott could still apply to those things.
Yeah, well, and also, like, what does the infancy of an entity like Mott look like? It's kind of impossible to say whether this was an entirely different entity or whether this was a larval form of the thing that would eventually become Mott.
Cool. Okay. So I relay all of that information to Veruta as it hits me. After the bit about it all exploding out from a center, I mutter, "Oh, I probably could have inferred that." But it landed, it lodged where it landed, and that might have been like a larval Mott.
Veruta looks very thoughtful, sort of staring into the middle distance, and Dosk perks up from where he was slouched and goes, "Huh. Never did imagine Mott in diapers." And then
I'd hate to have to change them.
snorts. Yeah.
Hey, Dosk.
Well,
You would probably have the most professional insight into this.
Into
The question I'm about to ask, namely, are we, I gesture broadly at the familia, the larval form of gods? Is it just a matter of power, or is it a matter of seigniorage?
That's a really interesting question, and you'd think I'd have a better answer for it having made the journey myself, but well, no,
I flex in Dosk's direction.
I respond when he says, I don't, which is why I asked.
Right, no, yeah, right. So I read a book about beekeeping one time, and there
I
are
lean forward as though this is not just fascinating, but totally relevant.
As I understand it, there are certain bee larvae, whatever.
Larvae, I say.
Doss snaps his finger and points at Leorian. That's it.
I also point at Leorian.
Yeah.
But not because I'm confident in his answer, but because he said it so enthusiastically.
This is correct, but not relevant.
Veruta lets out a very soft sigh. Dosk says, anyway, my understanding is that there are certain infant bees that could become queens or could become other things depending on how they are raised. And so I would say that's maybe sort of what Nobilis could be conceived of. You are not destined, if you grow in power, to become imperators, but there is the potential under the right circumstances for your essence to be transmuted into imperators, not unlike I was. It was not inevitable, not even likely, perhaps, but possible. As an out-of-character thing, Dosk is not saying this. You can consider it maybe sort of like certain Pokemon evolutions.
Eevee! Gods are evolutions.
Gotta find the dang Thunderstone, and then this will all fall into place.
You'll have to fight Philia for it.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to pick my favorite evolution now, and this seems cruel.
This is the part of the podcast where I admit that I am not a Pokemon kid.
Oh, good, because then I can claim Umbreon. And
I was about to say Umbreon.
Solid.
All right, I was going to say Umbreon. Sylveon I will take as a consolation prize.
Okay.
I know I'm not a player in this game, but I'm glad nobody has tried to stake a claim to Vaporeon.
Vaporeon is great.
I'm just going to
I
declare
love
that I get whichever Pokemon is most draconic.
You actually have a wide range to choose from. I mean, of the OGs, Dragonair, Dragonite, that whole series is probably your way to go.
Yeah.
I will leave that judgment to those with more knowledge.
Fair enough. Wrenching us back off of this diverticulum that I am solely responsible for getting us off onto. Dask seems very pleased with his explanation of, the sort of life cycle of a nobilis and their likelihood of becoming an imperator, and sort of leans back against the bar again.
I start to wonder when was the first time one of these entities took the form of a bee in this metaphor, something the nature and the thoughts of which we could recognize. So I perform a greater divination of revelry. And the question that I'm asking is, what was the first god to revel in its godhood in this age?
Okay, that's going to be 2 miracle points.
Yeah.
I love it.
By way of answer, what you receive is a fleeting image of a vague shape of a person with very little to distinguish or identify them, and the name Myon. I will put it in the chat so we can see it.
I convey this, and I say that Myon's idea of a party might be quite different from our own. But they do seem human-shaped to me.
Can I roll lore on this, Adam?
You may. I am going to impose a penalty die on your pool because this is extremely ancient.
Oh, sure.
This is what is known in historical circles as a deep cut.
Yeah, so for the listeners at home, this is a 5-die lore plus knowledge pool.
Rather than my usual 6, the
Correct.
penalty die. So, that is a horns roll.
Hey!
2 so far from you this session.
That's impressive.
Favorable.
Let me make sure I make a note of it. Okay, so what you immediately realize is that you have read and heard this name before. It's in a play. The play the name is from may or may not have any relation to the specific information that Leorian has just uncovered, but as you recall, the name of the play doesn't come to mind, but the events of the play are about a young noblewoman who runs away from home in pursuit of the man she's fallen in love with, who is part of a troupe of players. But when she catches up to them and insinuates herself among the players, she discovers that the young man that she so admired on the stage is in fact a young woman who was playing male parts, and the resolution of the play is that she discards her noble name in order to stay with her love. And depending on how the play is staged, this can be either a tragic end for her family or a triumphant end for her.
Marvelous. Shakespeare, but appropriately queer.
Yeah. On some level, that has just become Lissa's favorite play, even though she does not know any plays. Nor does she have that information. I'm going to pray to Myon just to see what happens.
Fascinating. I am going to figure out something for you to roll here because that will at the very least buy me time to come up with how this should play out. Let's see. Roll me a charm plus eerie, one of those sort of unusual pairings. That is going to be 3 plus a master die. I am not going to impose a penalty die, but I am going to impose a difficulty. I will not tell you what it is.
Spicy roll.
I got 2 10s on that roll, so
Nice.
it's gonna be 3 10s.
Hell yeah.
3 10s.
That
Excellent.
makes Please witness the beauty. Like, that's the best roll I've had in a while, so it needs to be on screen.
The listener
is
instructed that the camera has just made a sweeping crane-like gesture over the device.
Well, and for my part too, I always appreciate getting to see Robin's gorgeous D10s.
They're real pretty.
I do like them.
I like them a lot.
So
Shiny math rocks.
Here's an option I'm going to give you. That roll was successful. Would you like to spend 1 spirit miracle point or not?
Yes.
All right.
Fully because of the lovely description in the play.
What do you say in your prayer to Mion?
Hi, Mion. I am reaching out to you as the first of your kind and reveling in your own godhood. We seek your guidance because we are trying to end the hurtful cycle in hopes of making a better world.
The instant you finish your prayer, the very first thing, right, just like almost stepping on the heels of your thought or spoken words, is fitful giggling. I'm going to do my best to do it justice here. One moment.
Well, that's distressing.
Mm-hmm.
This is visible. This next thing is visible to anybody who happens to be looking. Lissa, how much of your hair is like loose to the sides of your head?
So I have a fairly large braid, but it's probably fairly disheveled. So there's a bunch of tendrils that have fallen down to either side of my head, or just are jutting out of the braids, having been through some stuff recently.
Whatever loose hair from your braid is on the left side of your head is swept back behind your ear, and there is the sensation on your ear of a close breath, followed by a very light kiss on the sort of connection of your jaw to your neck. And there is, audible only to you, the very faintest whisper, but it's in a language you don't understand. It sounds to you very throaty, but not at all unpleasant. That said, it carries a question with it. It is a yes or no question. In fact, it's a request for some kind of permission. You just don't know what exactly it's asking for permission for.
The interesting answer is yes here.
Read the book.
In what way do you indicate an affirmative?
I both say yes out loud And then I also do a nod and a kind of bow of acquiescence, thinking maybe that gesture carries across the eons.
Excellent. When you stand up from your bow, you are not moving your muscles. Something or someone else is. It doesn't last very long, but in the scant half minute here, where you are not in control of your movements, you hold out a hand, and a shape of a fish in some kind of brittle sculpture, maybe of hide or plaster, materializes in the air above your hand, and you reach behind you and pull, well, I guess behind you isn't quite right, reach to your waist and you pull Alecto out of her belt loop, and swing it at the fish. The fish cracks open and crystals pour out onto the surface of the table in front of you. And grinning, not precisely maniacally, but in a way that feels unfamiliar on your face, you swing Alecto down on these crystals 5 or 6 times, pulverizing everywhere you hit into powder. And then, on about the 3rd swing, there's a jolt and you're back in control. There's no evidence of the plaster fish or the crystals, though you are still holding Alecto.
So that happened. So everyone's drinks okay. Did you spill anything? I'm so sorry.
A few droplets here and there from the jumping of the cups and goblets, but nothing has been knocked over.
So I think that was Mion. And I don't think they're sane, but I think that was meant to be a helpful answer. Vruta, are you better at these sort of things? That's the strangest use of my hammer that I've ever experienced.
Vruta, for his part, is staring at the space on the table where the crystals were before they disappeared, along with the plaster fish. And when you mention him, he's well,
Can I try to my best to repeat the language, what was whispered in my ear, out loud as well?
Ooh, you can try. Let's see. Let's go with, I guess, knowledge plus hearing, which is going to be 2 dice.
I'm picking the 2. Nope, 1 and a 7.
Okay. I mean, you try, you feel like the overall impression of it, but you're sure that you have messed up some of the actual verbiage, and Vruta sort of blinks a few times and Vruta, for his part, doesn't seem to have a guess.
Okay.
It doesn't, not only isn't intelligible to him, it doesn't seem to map onto anything that he knows about world languages in the present.
So the tongue is dead, it seems, but the god, it would seem, is not.
Vruta narrows his eyes and says, I wouldn't be so sure. If our hypotheses are correct, and these shards are, well, sort of heirlooms, as it were, they pass over time from entity to entity, it's entirely possible that what we just saw was more of an echo.
We've encountered echoes of gods before.
At that, I kind of sit up, realizing that maybe unintentionally I left out the weird cross-channeling experience when praying to dead gods, or what I thought were dead gods.
Mm-hmm.
And I finished saying, that's why I find it hard to believe that destroying the throne will truly destroy everything, because it wasn't just an echo that responded to me, at least that first time, or even now it felt personal somehow.
Yes, Verta seems thoughtful. Is it possible, then, that divine things never truly die, but simply become a part of their successors? I suppose I have no way of testing this hypothesis.
Well, we all have exactly one way, but best not to rush to that.
He chuckles and says, "Yes, no, I'm not in a hurry."
It would be one miracle point for me to inquire of a legacy history, I suppose, for murder.
A provenance of murders?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yes, a major divination would be one miracle point for you. Would you mind giving me the specific wording of your question?
What are the names and durations held for my predecessors in murder back to the prior overgod?
Mm-hmm.
Why, yes, we are doing a full property investigation.
Old Testament listing of inheritance.
And God made Louisiana.
I was going to say, my medievalist poisoned brain goes immediately to like proofs of genealogy and patents of nobility. And actually, having said the word patents of nobility, I immediately am picturing A Knight's Tale starring Heath Ledger and Paul Bettany. The answer to your inquiry here...
Oh, you're not even having me roll anything.
I'm not.
Interesting.
Comes in the form of a whirlwind litany of impressions that you're pretty sure is inclusive, I guess, of delegated nobilis, people who have been delegated the Shard of Murder. Over
that was
time.
the intent of the question, so awesome.
Mm-hmm. But it does also include the entity to which the shard returns in between these. And there is immense continuity there. Seemingly from the moment that murder was separated from the whole, it has been in the portfolio of the same or very similar entity or entities. And that is relatively continuous with what you know to be Mott.
Okay, so Mott was also the first of murder?
Or something very like Mott.
Okay.
There is some wiggle room there. Either Mott's nature changed significantly over the eons, which is perfectly plausible, or there was something Mott-like that eventually Mott either incorporated or stole from.
A motley
I was
crew.
specifically avoiding using the word motley here.
This argument in philosophy is known as the Mott of Theseus, I believe. But
Drew, you're wonderful. Thank you.
That wasn't going to be Adam's reaction.
It is not impossible that, there were other things very similar to Mott in the early days, and that, Mott either incorporated or predated upon, one of its brethren. But it is also entirely possible that, whatever changes were wrought in Mott over the years account for the drift over the, sort of backward scanning timeline that you just got.
Okay. I will relay that.
Ruta seems thoughtful. Dosk seems distracted.
Cool. Do I get a similar result if I do the same for Fury?
Good question. You get a similar result in that you have a sort of whirlwind litany of Nobilis, although if you compare notes, yours is a shorter list of Nobilis.
Murder, it seems, is likely to be a useful thing to have in the world.
What you find for Fury is pretty similar. You come away from it with the impression that the original holder was distinct from Mott, but that the shard had been with Mott for a long time.
Cool. I also relay that.
Well, what of Tempo?
What of Tempo? It would appear to you that you are the first Nobilis of Tempo.
Oh, cool!
That a handful of entities have been in charge of it broadly. At first, it would seem that maybe some sort of nature spirit was a steward of Tempo, and then rapidly it changes hands 3 or 4 times. And then in the portfolio for quite a while of an ornately wrought but abandoned stone altar or maybe statue. And then it is orphaned for a time before it comes into the possession of Dosk.
Interesting. I relay this, of course.
Fascinating.
I toast you and say, first of your kind.
I answer the toast. This emboldens me to say, so, am I the only one who didn't understand the fish crystals?
No, you're not.
Vruta shakes his head.
I suspect it relates to a destruction of all the shards, possibly.
That was my feeling too, but I don't understand why they started in a fish. Maybe that was the overgod before the rock?
Vruta looks up and says, no, I don't know where the fish comes into it. Though, for what it's worth, he says, adopting a somewhat academic tone as though lecturing a class of university students, for what it's worth, the object, the fish, was very similar to some of the celebratory practices associated with Sirtha, the land, not the imperator. During certain types of celebrations, anniversaries and birthdays especially, they will make a sort of thin plaster shape and fill it with treats or party favors that people compete to break open the object, and once it spills, then there is a scramble to collect the treats or party favors from the table or the ground. Sorry, I've gotten off topic here. evidently the practice may be older than we thought. In any case, my best interpretation of what we saw is as an alternative, perhaps, to attempting to eliminate the throne itself, would be to, well, shall we say, distribute the shards more finely.
Oh.
Oh.
We presently are crystals. We could be powder.
That's,
or our domains could.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the best interpretation I have of that display. That is a fearsome hammer, Sister Lissa.
Thank you. Sister. I could get used to that.
He shrugs one shoulder awkwardly and says, "It seemed inappropriate to lack any sort of title, but you strike me as the type not to stand on ceremony."
Not at all.
At
You
last,
can call me
someone who
sis.
understands Lissa.
So I that was very helpful and insightful of you. I was just hung up on fish because I'm fresh off of hating the ocean.
He chuckles and he says, "I don't think that I would wager the existence of everything on my interpretation, but, well, I will say," and he chuckles, trying to contain himself, looking a little like he's verging on hysterical laughter, that being in charge of Flair was unexpectedly helpful because, divination of that kind of theatricality becomes possible. He takes a long sip of his wine.
I think it's worth investigating once we take care of Cillian. What would happen if we fully redistribute the power? If that's the goal all along, what if instead of having to destroy the throne, we merely destroy that which makes its machinations worthwhile?
I take out my lute and illustrate with an increasingly brief series of notes. If we are already divisions, or even subdivisions, if the gods themselves are divisions and we divisions of those divisions, then why not keep dividing? What if every mortal were a sort of semi-demigod?
Vruta looks thoughtful into the middle distance, but says nothing immediately.
Perhaps it is not just the category of God that needs to be abolished, but the category of mortal as well, I suppose is what I'm saying.
After what I did to those people at the party, that feels right.
I worry that if there is an impulse for notes, for half notes or quarter notes, to yearn to become whole notes, that even a subdivision down to the 64th note part would not eliminate that yearning.
I strike a long chord and let it ring as long as it will.
You strike the chord, and exactly one beat at the tempo you were playing afterward, Vruta sort of leans forward rapidly and snaps Currents of the Cosmos open and starts flipping through pages rapidly with a thoughtful look on his face. He says, "Yes, no, I think Ramnet has a point here," and he finds his page about a third of the way into the book and starts scanning it. And he says, I think that it may all be part of one thing." And he sort of scans down and scans down the next page, flips again and scans down and says, "Aha, okay. Currents of the Cosmos doesn't address it directly, but it seems as though there is in the author's mind the possibility of further subdivision. And, well, the author goes very academic here. I do not know precisely that to which they refer, but the author posits that if you drop something light a grain of sand or a feather. It falls more leisurely than something heavy. And that this is true metaphysically as well. It's an abstract passage. But if... No, I don't have any support for that. No, well, but... If the shards could be... He gestures at the table. Pulverized and distributed. Then it should at the very least lengthen the cycle. I understand that is not a permanent solution. But it could possibly also... What do we think the throne is?
A large seat?
Dosk speaks up and goes, No, it's
It's a vacuum or a keyhole.
Dosk nods slowly and says, It's an emptiness, but
Bless you.
it's metaphysical. It's more than that. It's spiritual. A physical vacuum is what causes a bellows to pull air in when the handles are pulled apart.
Yeah. I sit up at that.
he sort of nods and points. See, yeah. But this is more like desperately wanting to fall in love.
Oh. I also know that feeling.
Mood.
Dosk nods glumly. And then seems to realize who's around him and shakes his head quickly and moves on. He says, It feels... Certain sailors in my family's employ picked up a substance in the lands beyond the Shadowed Lands, Cirtha perhaps parts further north, that induced an ecstatic torpor. But after even brief exposure in terms of habitual use, they seemed to never stop wanting more. At least until committed to sanitariums for care, at which point, well, my family didn't care too much to follow up. I'm not sure what happened to them. I think probably that is analogous to the way that the throne feels. It is in
Desire?
Craving. The throne feels like wanting food when you're starving, or water when you're thirsty, or love when you're alone, or all of those combined and more. It is a constant pull on your soul. You can deny it, but it never goes away, and it becomes harder.
Could there be a shard in the throne?
Perhaps. He looks a little thoughtful. Perhaps there could. I hadn't thought of it before. I'd know of no definitive way to find out without risking, well, proximity metaphysically speaking, to it. And I'm trying to stay as far away from it as I can. But that is an interesting idea. In any case, how does one destroy a desire? And what if that desire is the motive force behind everything? What if it is the desire to exist rather than not?
Well, if that
Hey,
were so,
Adam.
then
How do you murder a desire?
Well, that is an excellent question. That will cost you 1 domain miracle point. So, this is a gift that you purchased, I believe, for 4 divine experience a little while back, about knowing
Thanks
how
to my former boss.
Indeed. Knowing how to murder things that aren't traditionally murderable. So this is going to take 2 miracle points from either domain or spirit, or 1 from each.
Okay.
And what everybody else in the Heart of the Chancel will see is Ramnet sort of flopping a little bit back into his seat, looking a little bit eyes unfocused, but clearly still like breathing and eyes moving. He'll be that way a moment. So if there are any particular reactions or anything you want to carry on with while he's doing that,
I think for flavor, I will preface that with, I wonder how, and then I flop.
I appreciate the preface because that gives me insight into what exactly is happening, considering that I just pulverized a plasterfish. I will likely, unless Leorian had something to chime in, but hey, Dusk, I might have some experience with murdering desire, which may surprise you to hear.
I mean, murder is distinct from sating it, I say, not actually in character or present.
Right. Dusk sort of cocks his head and says, well, do tell.
Do you remember when we went to the swamp?
I do.
Did I ever tell you what I saw?
Well, not in especially cogent words, because we were both pretty shaken.
Yeah, you'll probably laugh about it now, and I am too, but I I saw Rowena doing my hair. I was wearing a dress.
Huh.
And we both looked happy.
Huh. I see.
Just,
yeah, and then, right. Huh.
Sometimes what we desire isn't what we need or actually want.
You're right.
Is it, if I may, it seems wrong then to assume that just because there's a drive to take up this place, to enter this vacuum, to fill it, to take on this power, that's inevitable. I mean, if as soon as you have a clear picture of having what you want, you find that you don't want it, then to assume that our shards distributed as we're talking about, that would mean people would inevitably scrap and reconvene. I mean, that's just throwing people in a pit and then saying that for them to fight is human nature. You put them in the pit.
Vruta nods and opens his mouth to say something, At which point, Ramnat sort of and like sits back up. So Ramnat, we're going to track back to the last couple moments for you.
Sure.
So you said, I wonder how, and invoked your gift, and you are aware that you are having a vision, like with a capital V. This is something that is going to communicate to you in symbolic imagery, and you are sort of
I've graduated from lucid dreaming to lucid visions.
more or less the semi-lucid, I suppose, would be just
How
to set your
lucid?
expectations here. You are in a approximation of like a royal throne room, but instead of the refined regality that you might expect from such a thing, it is a sort of primordial, I almost want to use the word like atavistic version of the same thing, where instead of polished marble columns, you have alternating trees and stalactites having connected with their stalagmites. You instead of carpet, you have loam with moss coming out of it, and the throne itself is frankly inscrutable. It is a mountain range in the vague shape of a seat, but not for a person, not a throne in the literal sense. And yet you know conceptually that it is the thing that you've been referring to as the throne. But of course, it's also here in this room or this clearing or this cave, whatever this space is, there is a problem with the scale as you perceive it. And there are things, people and things. People things. Thing people. Filling the space beyond the columns on either side. The throne itself is vacant, and yet it is the only thing that draws attention in the room. And you will the movements that you undertake, but you don't control them directly. For an anachronistic analogy, think about pressing F to pay respects. You don't actually take any of the motions in a contextual button press or a quick time event, but you do initiate them. You have agency in that way. And so you find yourself walking forward until you are almost level with the throne. You feel yourself both dwarfed by the space you are in and yet looming impossibly gigantic over the geography of this seat of power. And looking directly down, you see that there is something of a crevasse in the back of this thing. And as much as you feel a desire to occupy the space, you can see something that appeals to a more fundamental desire in you specifically than the desire to occupy this space. It is your curiosity. There is something in the crevasse. It glints. You reach in, again, sort of on an autopilot, initiated by your desire to have the answer to this question. You reach in, you grasp whatever it is. It burns, it soothes. It's hot and cold, smooth and rough. It's not a thing in the physical sense, and your grip tightens around it. And you feel that you may crush it, but instead you force your hand open, and it comes apart as parts of it adhere to your palm and fingers and flake away. And when you back away, the dais is empty. The room is empty. Your mind and your heart are empty. And then you're back in the heart of the chancel.
Well, first there's the problem of scale. And then there's the problem of, well, desire or teleology. And then there's the problem of actually opening your hand. Backing up a step. Hello, everyone. How much time has passed?
A couple minutes.
This
wants
is
to fill
an
it in.
in-character inquiry.
No, I understood. I was supplying that to the characters who were watching.
Right.
Not too long. We were just reminiscing on previous adventures.
I'd say about one important story and about half a cup.
Cool. So, I just had a vision.
Cool.
Yeah. The throne is a mountain range, but also, like, a throne and, like, it's metaphors like turtles, all the way down. But there's the throne is both the draw and also there is something there. It is not purely a vacuum, at least among these sets of shifting, conflicting, conflating metaphors that I just invited myself to. There was something in a crevasse in the mountain range that is the throne, and it is a collection of... Would it be right, Adam, to say that it is a collection of all things, or just of contradictions?
You're not sure that you can say for sure that it was one or the other, in that all things would contain potentially infinite contradictions.
Well, in any event, there's a thing there. And despite being drawn to the throne and, the desire to occupy the throne, I don't know if it was because I am murder or because I was curious and asking a question, or what. But there was a thing in a crevasse in the mountain that is the throne. And I picked it up, and it was hot, and it was cold, and it was rough, and it was smooth. And it's unclear the degree to which it was just a set of contradictions, or whether it was everything. But instead of crushing it, instead of breaking it or possessing it, again, the metaphor breaks down upon inspection. Sort of like a joke. The destruction, the murder, was in opening my hands and letting it go. Am I interpreting this correctly, Adam?
I find no errors.
Cool. Would it be an appropriate extrapolation to think that the crushing it or the possessing it would instead be the becoming the overgod?
It certainly seems possible. You get the sense that would be distinct from simply occupying the throne, but it's possible that they would have the same outcome.
Then I will, relay that as well.
Sure.
But I think that there is a second step to the trap, essentially. There is a thing in or behind the throne that if you do not immediately occupy the throne, you have a chance to notice and either say yes or say no to, and saying no will be the end of the story.
Bruta is looking thoughtful and says, I don't know that I could be locked in a larder and voluntarily starve myself to death.
Indeed, this would mean no one has ever said no.
Dusk, you are the god of nothing.
Oh, yeah, no, that's true.
I think you could say no.
I appreciate your faith in me. What if, since I can feel it, since I can feel the sensation, I wonder, if the three possible outcomes from your vision were let it go and destroy it, occupy the throne itself, or else crush the thing inside it, what if crushing the thing inside it, if the thing inside it was everything and not merely contradictions, what if that was skipping the step of occupying the throne, just restarting the cycle from the end of the previous overgod without
I think that is
overgod?
exactly
Right.
that choice then.
Well,
it's
then
be an overgod, or don't be an overgod and start the cycle immediately, or end the cycle.
Well, that at least gives two possibilities that aren't becoming the overgod.
Sure.
He sort of shrugs, which is a little reassuring. He looks thoughtful, and
we should get you the Shard of Satiety.
Dusk sort of laughs and says, well, I mean, you can find it. I wonder if you feel the pull more strongly, the more shards you have, would, and he gestures to the table where the crystals had lain, would that diffuse the pull to where it was nigh imperceptible?
Well, as it is, we don't really feel it. And we have quite a bit more than dust.
He nods. He says, yeah, I think that's because I'm interposed between you and it.
Falling on the sword, I say, admiringly.
He shrugs uncomfortably and addresses Leorian. Have you been in touch with Firagi lately? How is she doing as High Priestess? I feel the more power I have, the better my chances.
We haven't checked in recently, but it's a simple enough thing.
He nods. He says, doesn't have to be this very moment, but just trying to hedge my bets, I guess.
I'm confident that she's doing extremely well. If anything, we need to be careful that she doesn't make you the sole god by sheer force of will.
Dusk chuckles somewhat uncomfortably. He says, all right. So, it seems like we've got 3 prongs. distribute the domains as broadly as possible. And then he looks thoughtful and says, maybe not to every person, but to everything. We here know that prosaic reality is actually full of spirit stuff. Every person could get 1 grain of domain dust, and an uncountable number of tutelary spirits could get their grain as well. But that would be prong 1. Prong 2 would be the top end that Ramnet saw in his vision. And prong 3 would be managing Celiand. No trivial task in its own right.
I feel like if we are to redistribute the shards, managing Celiand is the first step there, since she seems to have imbalanced majority.
Chronologically, it seems like that would have to come first. We would need to have the shards to pulverize, as it were. Tosk starts laughing with an edge of hysteria, but keeps it more or less under control, and Virta sort of nods and says, yes, that does incur some jeopardy in amassing shards, but certainly Celiand is not going to take kindly to the idea of pulverizing her own shards.
No,
for that matter,
I was rather suggesting that we pulverize her by finding her essence.
Right. I don't imagine that the deep would take kindly to it either, which introduces a problem. Though I suppose as long as Ventis is around. Ventis is around, right?
Technically.
Huh.
Around,
Somewhat
if not
reassuring.
about.
Indeed. Well, how do we propose to move upon Celiand, then?
First we have to find her.
Her essence. No small task.
Or
I
as
imagine
opposed
she
to
has
her
it guarded.
projection.
Well, and for what it's worth, as I'm sure may be clear to our players, but just to put it out there, Celiand has Nobilis, which means Celiand has a chancel. I don't believe we know anything about that chancel, but it's clear that it must exist.
We've tried to get to it.
Yes.
Perhaps it's different now because she is having to hibernate, having recently eaten. And we can infringe on the good graces, hopefully, of those we've met. Hi, what's up? We're trying to kill your god.
Honesty goes a long way.
Particularly when dealing with truth.
Quite.
So the first thing we need to do is find her chancel.
Das kind of nods. He's looking a little distant. And he holds up a finger. He says, hang on. I'm going to take us to a different common room. Tohil's here. And he sort of makes a gesture. And there's a sort of queasy smearing of the scenery, but then it resolves into the common room of the inn in Bor, where last you saw Rowena. The first thing that you see, though, you are sort of transferred into a relatively similarly arrayed table, though absent your drinks, in the common room here, and standing on the seat of one of these chairs is Tohil. His little wing claws are grasping a small silver bowl with something sloshing around in it. not entirely comfortably, but he's managing. And his shoulders just clear the edge of the table. The chair is pushed in relatively far there. Upon your appearance, Tohil sort of glances around at all of you and goes, "Oh, good to see you. I've only just arrived myself. To what do I owe the pleasure?"
We're plotting.
Dusk brought us here, but it's wonderful to see you.
We have a new addition to the Familia.
"Oh." And he sort of scans around and sees Vruta and inclines his head. He says, "I am Tohil." Vruta inclines his head and says, "Vruta, you are remarkable." And Tohil sort of, what's the word for that? Like kind of rocks his head to one side and says, "You are not incorrect." At this point, Urian, Rowena's husband, in full innkeeper mode, comes bustling over, kind of, wiping his hands on a towel and says, "Oh, welcome. What can I get for you?"
I'm feeling peckish. Bring me whatever you'd like.
Some food would be lovely, yes, thank you.
"Certainly, right away." He seems stoked, much more energetic than you've seen him in the past. You haven't seen Rowena. She doesn't seem to be in the common room or behind the bar. Urian has bustled off, and Dosk steps in and settles himself at the final empty chair at this table, and asks Tohil, "To what do we owe the pleasure? You're always welcome, of course, but is there anything particularly urgent?" And Tohil sort of bobs his head and says, "Well, I suppose you'll be the judge of that, but I was doing a little bit of reconnaissance on the other side of the Caroline Wastes. They are unattended by divine personnel at this point, but, Zalaban's corpse, now, I suppose, still rests in the deep earth, where it has been since time immemorial, and I did discover that Adeliova had been dispatched to mine out bloodstone where possible. I avoided her attention as far as I'm aware, but did have to beat a somewhat hasty retreat in order to do so. It does seem that bloodstone is being collected, though, which bodes ill, and I thought you should know."
Point of order.
Takes
Is
a couple of sips.
Adeliova was Domain of Beauty, or?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Tohil brings the bowl up to just below his chin, and his tongue darts out, taking a few sips of whatever's in it. Vruta still seems to be processing the whole talking
Robin
bat.
just squeaked.
I think the squeak.
I'm trying not to.
I think the squee or the squeak, however we wish to characterize it, is probably on the tape.
Probably.
I think if you heard it, it is unfortunately on the recording and certainly out of character.
Sure.
I strongly disagree about the unfortunate nature of it, but yes.
I'm trying to even get in character right now because there's just a very cute image of a bat holding a bowl.
That is interesting and worrying indeed.
Very concerning, yes. Considering that it seems that bloodstone is one of the few metals, dare I say, that can destroy a god.
He nods thoughtfully and says, "No, that does make sense. There are perhaps other ways, but I imagine that the body of an imperator would help in harming the substance of any other imperator. That tracks. Certainly
Other
with what I
ways there
know
may
about.
be, but this one has proven reliable.
Particularly in conjunction with predation.
I see. No, that seems distressingly plausible. I suppose that could explain why they were looking for more. One implement would not suffice, necessarily, if an unstoppable force met an immovable object. There could be mutual annihilation. It's possible that each such implement is single use.
Have we any way to know whether ours is spent?
I'm going to pour fury into both the bloodstone of Alecto and also the hilt to see their response. Essentially, whatever I did to enact the blade previously, I'm going to just do one in each.
Neither changes their shape or anything, but you get the same kind of feel, resonance from each. Let's see. In the interest of time, and because you have some experience with this, I'm going to rule that you feel that you could certainly use either of these in a similar fashion to how you used them on Tyrios, and if indeed bloodstone implements are single use when they're god-killing, it makes sense because you didn't kill Tyrios with that bloodstone implement. You tore his heart out and ate it. That's what killed him.
Unclear whether it was the tearing of the heart out or the eating, but either way.
There's no real scenario in which we plan to do one without the other. So
experimentally, this will remain unverified.
I mean, if you've done the one, then why not? It's what marketplaces are for.
I chuckle lowly to myself and then catch myself doing it and stop.
Thereby drawing everyone's attention.
I think both have one use available. They're unspent. I neglected to realize that it wasn't the blade that killed Tyrios.
So more than a single blow so long as the blow is not mortal. That seems important. Wounding a god, that comes without such a limitation.
That's apparently free.
That's great news.
You hear footsteps on the stairs leading down from the second floor, and anyone who turns or is facing in that direction will see Rowena much as you saw her in Lurenton, dressed all the way up for that town and moving with a certain amount of grace, casting a somewhat disdainful eye over the inn's common room, and stiffening when that eye falls on you all. She glances at the kitchen door, which Urian bustles through with a large pot and with a tray set on top of it with some bowls and some loaves of bread, as he comes to settle some stew and bread on the table for you. You may serve into your own bowls with a ladle provided. And Rowena speaks up from the stairs, seeming to want to remain above everyone, and says,
literally as well,
"Oh dear, guests, and I was so pleased to get so few. Well, be welcome. What She looks a little distasteful. Can we do to make your stay a comfortable one?
You're looking much more like yourself, Rowena.
I can't imagine what it is that you mean, sister, but I shall take it as a compliment.
I thank Urian for the food.
He nods affably and says, I hope it's to your liking. Just let me know if it needs anything.
Of course.
He
without addressing Rowena,
Yeah.
I will just start serving myself up and dig in.
Urian saunters back over to the bar and busies himself with any of the number of repetitive and mostly already completed tasks that a tavern keep can occupy themselves with. Industriousness theater, if you will. Tohil, for his part, turns to Vruta and asks, would you mind terribly putting a small amount of the stew in my bowl? And Vruta goes, oh, sure, and ladles out one scoop that Tohil sort of sets his beverage bowl down carefully and then leans over to sort of lap at the stew, making small yummy noises to himself as he does.
Both in and out of character,
Uh-huh.
I look sad that I was not the one to refill the bowl. Especially with the small yummy noises.
Rowena, for her part, says with a fair amount of disdain, well, I suppose that it's just as well that we'd have all our guests so far at once. I shall let our lodger know that dinner is ready. And sort of daintily steps up the stairs looking somewhat put upon.
Lodger, I call after her.
She says, that is what I said, and then turns the corner at the top of the stairs. Urian speaks up from across the room and says, oh, very, very nice chap, very polite. Didn't catch his name. He came in rather travel-worn. Haven't seen too many people, though, since we opened the place, so nice to have it convivial. He gives a broad smile.
I smile at Urian. It's good to see you feeling so spirited.
Well, I know that my darling Rowena doesn't like it very much, but we are seemingly stuck here, and, well, making the best of it keeps me busy, and, well, this suits me a little better than Councilman ever did. Still, it'd be nice to have some neighbors, if you wouldn't mind putting in a word with the big guy for us. Dosk,
I can do that.
sitting at his table, just looks a little perplexed.
I will turn to look at Dosk and say, I'll do that.
Dosk just kind of leans his head on his hand. You hear footsteps at the top of the stairs. Certainly not Rowena's. And turning, descending the stairs, and coming to a stop as soon as he catches sight of you is Truth. He sort of blanches and goes, oh, hi. And that's where we'll end our session.
Most excellent.
Most excellent.
So everybody can take one mortal experience point for this time. And I'll
you
just...
never described the nature of my metal roll XP.
You're right. I really should have thought to do that, but I was already hustling on to advancement. So we will say that this one is an iron lumpen experience point, glowing as though hot out of the furnace. And with that backfill, we conclude the session of Dice Punks. Thanks for joining us. I hope our players and listeners enjoyed it as much as I did, and I did enjoy this extremely planning and philosophizing intensive discussion session. But I hope it was fun to listen to as well, and I do hope that you'll join us again next time. If you're hearing us now, you probably know where to listen to this, but you can find us almost any place one can listen to podcasts, as well as on the wider web at dicepunks.com, and currently, for now, on Twitter as @dicepunks. With that, though, I think we're ready to say farewell, so say goodbye to the kind folks at home, players.
Thanks for listening. Whack the fish festively, grind the crystals to dust, and dare to imagine a better world.
Thanks for listening, everyone. If you're looking for a way to make your event, formal meeting at your job, your school council meeting, your PTO meetings more festive, might I recommend a piñata? You don't need to have any prelude to it. Just show up with a piñata. You don't need to explain what you're doing. Just smash it to bits. It'll get the message across.
Thanks for listening. And never lie to truth, but certainly consider how much you'll say.
And as the poet once said, you'll never reach the end, you'll never hear enough. Your half-grasp can't exterminate my stand, and you can't rule with a broken upper hand. Thank you for tuning in, dear listeners, and stick around through the admin stuff for Alyssa's line. The songs in this episode, Theme of the Dice Punks and its acoustic version, were written and recorded by the Viscount of Tempo in his element, Drew. Cover art and episode editing was done by Joanne, who has appeared in the podcast now and again. Check out her work on the internet where she goes by Anything Sows. Site design and graphics for DicePunks.com are by Robin, the player behind Lissa and Mavia, the Nobilis of Fury and Madness. Rain and the one-roll engine it runs on were created by Greg Stolze, whose work can be found in a frankly astonishing number of places, but I'll point you toward gregstolze.com. Nobilis was created by Jenna Caterin Moran and can be found, along with a lot of her other work, at afarandsunlessland.wordpress.com. Links to both systems and authors can be found in the Punk Grimoire section of our website, dicepunks.com. Thanks so much for listening. If you like what you heard, that's reward enough on its own, but if you're so inclined, you can help us out by rating and reviewing us wherever you listen to us, telling your friends you'd think would like us to give us a listen, or even heading over to our Patreon at patreon.com/dicepunks. We have fun rewards available for backers, including a patron-only Discord and access to the Dice Peaks After Show for episodes 1 and following. Regardless, we hope you'll tune in again, and until then, remember, subtlety is for cowards.
When it comes to blacksmithing, there is nothing like a good alloy. A perfect combination might strengthen, lighten, or make metals more workable. Some of the most desirable materials, like bronze or steel, are perfect unions between unlikely, even oppositional duos that, when united, somehow elevate each other. I like to think that soulmates, too, are alloys. They're a perfect set of opposites forged through vulnerability and experience to become something bigger than the sum of their two parts. For this reason, I don't think that soulmates are exclusive to romantic love, but they can be platonic or even familial. I met my first alloy, as it were, several years ago. I had liberated myself from Lurenton, though not for the first or the last time. And I was intent on making my way to Calavan, which my family had spoken of often. It was a long, long way for little feet to tread, so I curled up in the roots of a sprawling tree at night and awoke sometime later to someone swearing with colorful and previously unfamiliar creativity. A small caravan of trade folk were making their way from Pilden to sell their wares. One of the party had veered off to find a spot to relieve themselves, while the other set up camp. But he had instead stumbled upon a muddied, half-feral child asleep at the base of the tree. For a moment we could only stare at each other. Can't say for certain what he saw, telling bruises, perhaps, or The kicked puppy expression of a child used to being told they caused more trouble than they were capable of. Or maybe he just saw a young girl, roughly the age that his daughter would have been, had life dealt him kinder cards. He told me that a tree was no place to be sleeping for a lass my age, and that if I preferred it, there was a warm meal and a bedroll waiting for me. I put my hand in his, and he asked no questions as we strode back to camp, nor did he tolerate questions from the others as he wiped the mud from my face and hair and fed me. But when I sat perhaps too close to the fire, he sat by the flames with me, told me about their properties and strength, and he taught me that people had embers inside of them, too, that should be nurtured and not snuffed out. That close to the road, it wasn't long before a search party found me, and I wouldn't see that man again for probably a bit over 10 years. When he found my camp, still a day's travel from Hilton, following my final liberation from Lurenton, he recognized my flame-lit silhouette immediately, even from the road, and even after for so long. Instead of swearing that time, Varric tells me instead that he left Fort. Instead of swearing that time, Varric tells me instead that he just let forth a resigned sigh. Some daughters are born, he said. Others are found sleeping like slag in the ashes. And he's not one to question it when he finds the same one twice. I've met other soulmates since. Dosk, Romnet, though he'd not admit it. Ligorian, though admitting it would probably cause him to panic. Apatia, Enby, and now Varuta. Forged family, like what Varric used to call us. Alloys strengthening each other, bringing out our best qualities. And if an alloy like steel can bring about a new age, so can we.